So President Trump claimed that he would surround himself with some of the best people, right? The best workers, the best minds, even though he has totally the best mind. And he's a very stable genius, is what I hear. Also, he can get the work of making America great again. Well, one of his hires has drawn a lot of scrutiny, and believe me when I say that that's actually really hard to do. And you're going to see why. Now, the man in question is Taylor Weyeneth, right? Now, Taylor Weyeneth, when you look at his resumes, is actually quite impressive, considering the fact that he is 23 years old. Wow. He's actually one of the youngest appointees to the administration, and has somehow ended up in a top position in the White House's drug policy office. Now, boy, to be elevated that far, that must mean that he's a really super talented guy. I mean, getting a top position in the White House at that age, that's super, super impressive, right? So he must have great qualifications, right? Well, let's take a look. Now, while in college, late in 2014 and early 2015, Taylor Weyeneth began working as a legal assistant at the New York firm O'Dwyer Bernstien. Okay, well, I don't know anything about O'Dwyer Bernstien. I'm assuming that that's somewhat prestigious, right? Now, in a resume initially submitted to the government, Weyeneth said he worked at the firm until April of 2016. So he'd worked at that firm for quite some time. Now, following his graduation in May of 2016, Weyeneth served as a paid member of Trump's presidential campaign and then as a volunteer with the transition team, arranging housing for senior administration officials. He had worked closely with Rick Dearborn, now White House Deputy Chief of Staff. Now, so apparently he worked as a legal assistant for several years, and then worked in the Trump transition, right? So his experience is actually a little light, but that's something that you would expect out of a 23-year-old, right? So his experience, again, working for the Trump campaign, but yet he's in charge of the ONDCP, and that's the agency that's actually supposed to create drug policy. So, yes, very, very light on qualifications. That in itself is somewhat concerning for something that should be very, very important, especially considering that we're facing an opioid crisis. But that wasn't the only problem, his lack of experience when it comes to this appointee. Apparently, on his resume, he made a few errors. Let me go through those. Now, according to the New York Times, on his resumes, Weyeneth revised dates relating to job assignments, and he cut the number of hours he claimed he had volunteered at a monastery in Queens while at St. John's. Now, wait a minute here. So, look, again, on his resume, he claimed that he volunteered about a total of 275 hours at a monastery. Huh. But his second revision, cut it from 275 to just 150. So, that's interesting. Now, when people noticed that, they began to ask questions. So he's like, I'm going to have to revise my resume again. It turns out that whole 150 thing, not exactly correct. Turns out, I didn't actually volunteer at all at a monastery. A third resume provided by the White House does not mention any volunteer work at the monastery. 275, oops. 150, not quite right. 0. Yeah, now we're there. That's not the worst part, right? There are also actually some questions about his work as a legal assistant while he was in college. Now, when an FBI official called as part of a mandatory background check in January of 2017, the firm said that Weyeneth had actually left 8 months earlier than his resume indicated. Now, you're not gonna believe the reason, right? Now, O'Dwyer said that he hired Weyeneth in part because both men were involved in the same fraternity, and that the firm invested time in training him for what was expected to be a long relationship. Instead, he said that Weyeneth decided he just wasn't going to show up. But show up? Like, what? To work? That's exactly what he means. Like, yeah, you know what? I just don't feel like going to work. Now imagine, like, could you just not show up at work and then suddenly get an appointment to the White House? I don't think that's what happens, but if you're in the Trump orbit, if you work for the Trump White House, that's exactly what happens. I mean, again, how do you not show up for work and end up in the Trump administration? I don't know. I don't know. That's amazing. Now, there's one more thing, right, that they questioned. And that's, of course, his education. Now, one of his resumes said that he had a master's degree from Fordham University. Well, that's very impressive, right? Of course. I mean, look, you're thinking, surely he wouldn't lie about his education, right? No, of course he wouldn't. According to a university official who talked to the Post, Weyeneth, while actually going to Fordham University, yes, he didn't lie about that, but apparently he hasn't even finished his coursework. The balls on this guy. Not only did he not show up to work, but he at his previous job and claimed to be there longer than he was actually there. He also lied about volunteering at a monastery. And to top it all off, he never finished his degree, while claiming to have a master's degree. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have found the perfect addition to the Trump administration. Look, you think that disqualifies him from this current administration? No, that actually makes him more qualified. Amazing. He's almost as brazen of a liar as Donald Trump. I'm surprised that they're actually removing him from that position at all. In fact, according to the Times, an administration official on January 12th said that Weyeneth will return to the position he initially held at the agency. So no longer would he be actually in charge. He would actually be a White House liaison. Still an important position, still an influential position, and still one that he totally does not deserve. Now, the official said that Weyeneth had been primarily performing administrative work rather than making policy decisions. Well, thank God on that. And that he had assumed additional duties and an additional title following staff openings. Now, that's also really important. So it was also reported that 11 people who were in the drug policy agency, right, had quit. They resigned. Well, why would they do that? Well, it turns out that it's because of President Trump's proposed budget. They actually want to cut the funding for this agency by 95%. Again, this is the office that is actually there to try and do something about the opioid crisis, right? The opioid crisis that is killing thousands of Americans right now, all over the country. That's an epidemic. It's an epidemic. And yet, the Trump administration is like, yeah, let's cut the budget by 95%. They're not actually doing anything about the crisis. They don't actually care. Look, I feel bad for anybody who actually believed that Donald Trump is going to do anything. And again, it makes me go back and think about the CNN guy, right? Or the guy on CNN who, you know, his son died from opioid overdose, and he would go around and he'd sing songs about Trump, and he tried to get him elected. All these different, Trump rallies, he'd play his guitar. And later on, when he realized that Trump wasn't actually going to do anything about the opioid crisis, he's like, I was wrong. I put away my guitar for good. And he's like, I feel cheated and betrayed. And that's exactly what's going on here. He does not care about any of this stuff. He does not care about the people who are suffering, the people who are dying. And it shows with not only who he puts in charge of his agencies, but how much he gives, how much funding he actually gives them or doesn't. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.